Are you thinking of selling your property in Calgary? If so, you're going to want to pay attention to this video as I go over the most costly pitfalls I see sellers go through when going through the process, and some of the most annoying things that happen to them that cause some headache. So let's get right into it. And this video is meant to be more of a bullet point, fast, quick, and easy. And the first point here, I'm just going to brush over this because you'd think this would be common sense. You want to price the home correctly. You want to make sure it's easy to show the property. And you also want to make sure that it shows well. If you handle those three things, it makes everything so much easier. And point number two, when pricing your property for sale, don't look at the active homes as the basis for pricing your property. You can overprice the property and it'll sit in the market forever. You want to base your price on what has sold recently that's comparable to your property. Point number three, not doing what it takes to price your home correctly. Now, what I mean by this, if you come on the market, you're getting a lot of showings but no offers, you're probably 5% too high after, say, 2 weeks on the market. Now, if you're on the market for 2 weeks and nothing is happening, it's dead, you could be 10% too high, at least. That ratio has worked my entire real estate career. Lots of showings, no offers. You're probably within 5% of the right price. Now, if your property is not selling, you're going to want to have like realistic price reductions. Again, 20 days in the market, you're getting lots of showings and no offers, and you're a $1 million listing. If you reduce it by like 2,000 to 5,000, it's probably not going to do anything whatsoever. But if you make that 5% adjustment, it's probably going to sell the property. And this seems to work all the time for me. And point number four, regarding the listing contract, if you're a seller, you should really understand this contract. Ask your agent questions, read it, try to understand it. Too often nowadays, I just see sellers who just click, and they do electronic signatures, and they have no idea what they're signing. Not all agents are looking out for the best interests of their clients. There are some bad apples out there, like in any industry. And so just protect yourself, know what you're signing, ask the agent for a PDF version before you do electronic signatures. That can help. And ask them to come over sometimes. If you're uncertain and you're kind of, you're just very cautious, ask the agent to come over and go over the contract with you. So typically when I go on listing appointments, I bring like the old-fashioned written version of the contract, and I prefer to go over it with them versus electronic signatures, but whatever is best for the client. But it does help to actually go over it and explain the details of the contract. And some of the more important aspects of the listing contract is obviously the commission. It can be quite costly to sell a property, or how to get out of the contract. How long is the contract? What happens if it's not working out and you want to cancel it? Just issues like this can pop up. Now, when you're on the market, point number six, if you're on the market, I would avoid advertising on the MLS. They're going to give a buyer credit for certain items. Maybe the flooring is damaged, or there's the window coverings are damaged, or this or that. I would avoid putting in the actual MLS form that you're going to give the buyer a credit towards this or that. It kind of comes off like, what else are you going to discount? You're going to discount the price. And it can also come off as, does the home show a lot worse than the actual photos on the MLS system? So it can kind of put that kind of fear in the buyer's mind. So just be cautious. I wouldn't advertise that you're willing to discount this or that. Let the buyer tell you what they want after viewing the property, and if they're interested in writing an offer. Put kind of the onus on them. And point number six, I already talked about this, but you want to have good photos, obviously, and make sure your home is clean and tidy. You'd think this would be a given, but routinely I'm at a listing where I'm taking photos with the photographer and I'm moving things out of the way. I'm trying to clean up at the same time. Make sure that it shows well. Like, you want to look like a show home if you can. And make sure it's clean and tidy. I've seen buyers walk out of properties because it was kind of dirty and disgusting, and that's going to cost you money. So just use your common sense. Good photos, make sure it's clean and tidy. Point number seven. Now, I'm not a huge fan of overhauling your property just to list it. You don't have to do massive renovations to sell your property. More so, you just have to price it correctly. But there are certain things that you can do that will help you out. If you have a home that has crazy like neon green paint or just weird paint colors, I would try to paint it over before listing it. Paint goes a long way in terms of selling your property, and it's not that expensive and it's fairly easy to do. So maybe get neutral paint colors if you have some like, pinks and greens and some weird colors. That can definitely help you out. So good paint colors, priced right, shows well, easy to show. These are all simple things that you can do to help sell your property. And the next point, number eight, is bad lighting and too hot or too cold of a temperature in the property. And I'll give you a good example. I was showing the property 2 days ago in Killarney. It was like a 1950s bungalow. It wasn't land value. It's a property the next buyer would probably want to move into, but it was quite rough, obviously to be renovated, and It was just really dark, all the blinds were closed, and it was freezing cold. It kind of felt like going through a haunted house while I was waiting for the buyer to show up, and I was just kind of waiting around. And a lot of buyers, they just don't like that. They kind of want to get out of those properties if it's too hot or if it's too cold. And the lighting just kind of gives you a bad first impression. And in our winters in Calgary, it gets so dark. Like it doesn't get light until 9 in the morning. It gets dark at like 4:30. So if you are listing your property and showing it in the wintertime, I'd have all your lights on. It does give a better first impression. I think this does help. And the next point, number 9, is poor showing availability and restricting showings. This can definitely hurt you. And there are some sellers out there who are just like a bit uptight when it comes to showings. Like, who are these people? Why are they coming at this time? Why aren't they coming when I'm okay with it? They're trying to make that buyer work around their schedule. I can tell you the buyers don't care about your schedule. They are viewing properties when it suits them. So you have to work around their schedule if you're a serious seller. If you restrict showings, it definitely hurts you. I would say maybe half of the buyers that you cancel, they don't come back. They're out there shopping for properties and they could find something else and you've lost that buyer. And that could have been the person for your property. So don't restrict showings. Don't try to make them adapt to your schedule. It is awkward listing and selling your property, but you have to do it. That's just the way it is. The buyers have their schedule, you have yours. But if you want to sell it, you have to make it easy for the buyer. Number 10, no unannounced door knockers into your property to view it. If they're coming there on their own without an agent, with no appointment, and they want to see your property, I would say no. I would tell them to come back with their agent. There's just too much risk and liability these days. What if they're criminals? What if they try to steal some stuff or kidnap you? Who knows? There's all sorts of crazy stories out there. And I know I just said try to make it easy for the buyers to view your property, but they can come back with their agent. It's not the end of the world to rebook them, and protect yourself. Number 11, now this one is more for the buyer's agents or the buyers out there. It's hard to control from the selling end of it, from the listing side of it. And that is don't show properties with your kids or pets if you can avoid it, especially kids. They're running around, they're jumping on beds, they're playing with other people's toys. They can be very distracting. So it's just a bit easier to view a property if you're a buyer without bringing your kids if you can. And I haven't had this myself, but I've heard stories of people bringing their pets to open houses and on showing appointments. Like, my goodness, this is such a crazy thing. Don't bring your pets when viewing properties. And point number 12, avoid the buyer and seller talking or getting together at all costs. This is usually a bad idea in that they can both talk too much. The seller could talk about the bad neighbor or the flood from 5 years ago, or there's a biker gang down the street. They could just talk too much. They could give away their motivation. And same thing on the buyer end. They could give the seller clues that they're so motivated, and that seller could be very tough on price because they know the buyer is so motivated. So it's just a bad idea for both buyer and seller to get together. I would avoid it at all costs if possible. Number 13, getting too emotional during the listing process, the sales process. This happens quite often. I see it all the time, where a buyer sends in an offer and the seller freaks out and they're just like, no, take it or leave it. This is our price. Just be calm and collected. It's not the end of the world to get a lowball offer. Just counter them at a higher price and see how it goes. For example, just yesterday, I have a listing, $845, I think is a list price, and we had an offer coming at $800,000. Now, some sellers would just freak out and take it or leave it, go away, and they just get up in arms about everything. But if you're calm and collected, you can put deals together. This one actually closed at $835, which was probably market value. So things do come together if you're calm and collected and you're respectful. Just don't freak out. It's human nature for buyers to want things at a lower price, but you'd be surprised. Many buyers are also quite cooperative. And if you don't piss off the buyer or the seller, you'll find that both parties can routinely become cooperative and put a deal together. So just be calm and collected. And this is why it's good to have an agent with some experience, because we're kind of black and white and we don't get too emotional about the process for the most part. Number 14, poor management in terms of delaying buyers. So I'll give you an example of this. I've been licensed since 2012 and I've seen two markets that were like really hot in 2014, and then from like 2022, 3, 4, it was red hot in Calgary and there was bidding wars all over the place. And if you listed your property for sale, you'd get offers like immediately. In situations like that, it's good to delay the buyer a few days. A good example is like you'll list on a Thursday and look at offers on like a Sunday or a Monday. It gets lots of buyers into the property, gets lots of bidding wars, and usually you get a better price if you're a seller. So that's what you want to do when the market's hot. But when the market's balanced like it is right now, or a buyer's market, like our condo in the townhouse sector, If I write an offer and that seller is pushing us off for a few days, those buyers are probably just going to take off and look at something else. And I've had this happen to me. So you have to know the market that you're in. In a hot market, you can do this, but in a balanced or a buyer's market, this is a bad idea. It's better to deal with the offer in hand than pushing them off for a few days in this type of market. Number 16 is pre-home inspections. Now, I'll give you an example. This property I talked about earlier in Killarney that was like a 1950s bungalow. It was a renovation project. It wasn't land value. I think the next buyer is probably going to move into it and fix things up. But it was old. Like the furnace was ancient. Like it needed lots of work. And if I was that seller, I would probably do a pre-home inspection and look at what's actually wrong with the property. And depending on what it is, I'd look at fixing it up. But more likely, I would look at pricing it correctly given the state of the property, which in this case, it wasn't. And I imagine this home will take a few buyers. They'll have some canceled transactions because many buyers think it's cheaper to fix properties than it actually is. I showed it, and this buyer that I had thinks it's going to cost like $5,000 to do this or whatever. And I was thinking in the back of my head, no, this is going to cost like $100,000 to fix up. And I told him I wouldn't go ahead with this property. It's not worth your time at that price. But this seller is going to have some problems, I think, and they're going to go through a few buyers because a lot of people think it's that easy to fix up. Again, I would have a pre-home inspection. I'd post it to the MLS and I'd give it to the buyer's agents so they can see before actually viewing the property what's wrong with it and they can do their own calculations. I think it would just save them time. That's what I would do if I was a seller, is just be ahead of that versus getting buyers who are not really that experienced with renovation projects. And you could write offers, get them accepted, and take your home off the market for 2 weeks for conditions just to have it fall apart. Number 17. So when you're going through the purchase contract and the buyer has conditions for like a home inspection, sometimes there are issues with the property the buyer wants fixed before possession. And it's quite common for the buyer to have a term in the contract, this to be fixed before possession with a holdback of this amount, that if it's not done, that money is released to the buyer. I find it's a bit easier for a seller to just reduce the price by a realistic amount to fix those items. Let the buyer handle that. If you're handling it, sometimes the buyer gets a bit too picky. They get involved in like the construction materials. They want to inspect it over and over. It's just easier to reduce the price. Let the buyer handle it if you can. And number 18 is the holdback clause. I just talked about this. Now this is more for the buyer, but it kind of relates to the seller as well, in that you want to have strong terminology regarding the holdback clause. Make sure it's specific and it just kind of lays out what has to be done. Again, the holdback is if you want something done in the contract, like the buyer wants furnace cleaning or professional cleaning or to fix the fireplace. The seller has to do this before possession. If they don't do it, there's money released to the buyer. So this is more of a buyer term, but it's still good for the seller to know what they're signing. I've had sellers where they're like, okay, I'll fix this, I'll fix that. Then they just change their mind. And I've had lawyers kind of force it on them to actually live up to the contract. So if you are a seller, make sure you understand this holdback clause and make sure you're okay with it. Number 19, and this is a big one, I get this quite often, don't let the buyer do any renovation work to your property until they've moved into it. I get this quite often with like a tradesman. I've had people asked to paint the property, do fencing work, this and that, and it's just too much risk and liability. What if that buyer damages the property and they walk away from their deposit and now you're stuck either in a lawsuit or you're stuck finding a new buyer? It's just not worth the risk. Don't let the buyer do any renovation work to your home until they've moved into it. Number 20, don't let people into your home after the property is firm. So firm means after all conditions are removed and the buyer has bought the property, you're just waiting for possession. I would avoid having the buyer come into the property until their pre-possession walkthrough, unless they have like a term in the contract allowing it. It can be a bit of a mistake because buyers can get cold feet. They can walk away from deposits. They can bring in their uncles and their family handyman, and they can talk them out of the transaction. And it can be kind of annoying. You can get interior decorators in there, and they want to spend 3 hours going through your property again. It can just be a pain, and it's not worth the risk. So I would avoid having the buyer come into the property unless they have a term in the contract. A good rule of thumb is they're not allowed back into the property until the day before possession. Number 21, no move-ins into the property. Now I've had a few examples like this where possession is say on a Monday and it's like a Thursday or a Friday and they want to move in early during the weekend to get things ready. This is quite a common request. And the issue with this, if you're a seller, is that what if they damage the property in the meantime? Or say they don't like the property anymore. It doesn't look the same now that it's vacant, and they just change their mind, they get cold feet, and they walk away from like a $5,000 deposit. Stuff like this can happen. There's just too much risk and liability. So I would say don't be nice, just be logical and realistic. The buyer can wait until possession day. There's just too much risk for you as a seller to let them in early. Number 22, long closing possessions. Now, I've had an example in the past where we sold the property in like a February and possession was in October. This was a pretty tough market, and that's why we accepted this offer. But under most circumstances, you don't want to do this. There's just too much risk. Like, what if the buyer loses their job 6 months later and they can't qualify for the property now, and they just walk away from their deposit, and you're stuck going back on the market? And what if the market has dropped 10% in that time? So you don't want to have a long possession if it can be avoided. Now, a good rule of thumb in real estate is it's a 3-month cycle business. It takes the home a month to sell, and most buyers want 2 months to move into it. I would try to keep it within these parameters. I wouldn't go for an extra long possession if it can be avoided. Number 23, when you're on the market and you get a request for the buyer to see if their truck fits in the garage, or if their boat fits in the driveway, or if their vehicle fits in the underground parkade, I would say no if you can. Again, there's just too much risk. I've seen trucks try to squeeze into underground parkades and almost hit the ceiling. And what if they damage your garage and they vanish and you have no idea who these buyers are? Now, I've seen this firsthand, but it's not all that common, but it does happen. And if you can avoid it, I would definitely do it. Again, there's just too much risk. Number 24, can they rent it before purchasing the property? I would just avoid this. If you price your home well, make sure it shows good and it's easy to view it, you can find a good buyer. I wouldn't get into these buyers that want to rent it before purchasing it. What if they rent it and you can't get them out of there? What if they're squatters and they make it difficult to view properties once you try to sell it? There's too many issues with tenants. I would avoid this if you can. Point number 26, no side deals. If it's not in writing and signed off by the buyer and the seller, it doesn't exist, and you can get burned if you rely on a side deal. The old-fashioned handshake and trust, sure, it can work, but it can also really burn you. So if it's not in the contract and in writing, don't count on it, and just protect yourself. And number 26, I think it's a good idea for the buyer and seller not to have each other's contact information. There are times where they do exchange information, sometimes e-transfers for like furniture and stuff like that. But if it can be avoided, I would definitely do it, because you might have a buyer that comes back to the seller asking lots of questions, or they're being pesky and annoying, and they're wanting money for this or that, or they're complaining that you didn't disclose this. So a good rule of thumb is that they shouldn't meet each other and they shouldn't have each other's contact information. And number 27, the last point, and the most costly of all, is being a for sale by owner. Now, a FSBO, or a for sale by owner, they typically sell for about 10% less on average. So if you want to throw away your money, go as a for sale by owner. And I can tell you from years of experience, I used to call about 30 FSBOs per day, and I've closed many transactions with them as the listing agent. And it's a nightmare for them. And you might get the odd one here and there that sells for a good price, but most of them are leaving money on the table. Like 10% is a huge discount. That's more than the commission. And there's just so many red flags and stigma with these properties that I would just completely avoid it. It's a lot faster and easier, and you get more money in your pocket by dealing with an agent. And the stats prove this. And from my 12 years of experience or so, I can definitely say that you do get more money with a good full-service listing brokerage. So just don't do it. It's not worth your time. And we're done. That's my list of the most costly things that I see when going through the selling process. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're out there watching this and you could use some help buying, selling, or relocating, I'd love to be a resource and to help you through the process. You can call, text, email, or comment. I will get it and get back to you. And I've also got some free resources for you in the pinned comment, buyer's guide, seller's guide, and a relocation guide, all free for download. And I will see you on the next video.